military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a great weekend. We're going to be talking about the campaign, getting into the last full 2 weeks of the campaign, and lots to talk about. If we look at the polls, we don't look at the polls too often, but I think it illustrates, again, something we'll talk about a little bit more in the second hour. If you look at the Rasmussen polls, that one says that Donald Trump is ahead 43% to Hillary Clinton's 41%. Also gives the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson, about 5% and about 3% for the Green Party nominee, who is Jill Stein. And then if you look at Investors Business Daily, they have it as pretty much a 41% tie. And then if you go to the Los Angeles Times, they have Hillary Clinton up 45%, actually 45.1% to 43%, so almost 2% difference. And if you don't think that's a little bit odd, just recognize that on Friday, the Los Angeles Times tracking poll had Donald Trump up 45 to 44. Well, we're going to get into some of that a little bit later, especially in light of the WikiLeaks dump that now tells us a little bit more about John Podesta and his attempts to maybe encourage some of the pollsters to oversample certain areas. And then the whole issue of rigging elections. James O'Keefe has another video out which now suggests that Hillary Clinton was more involved than maybe we assumed in the first few. So there are lots of things to talk about, but we thought it would be great to bring to the microphone an individual that has been writing and speaking about this and broadcasting about this for some time. Carmen LaBerge is actually the host of a radio show called Reconnect with Carmen, and it really is an attempt to bring God back into the conversation. So we're going to be talking about that with her. She's also serving as the president of the Presbyterian Lay Committee, and has been a speaker at many of the conferences we've promoted right here on Point of View. So, Carmen, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's a privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit more about your radio program. I know that maybe our listeners in Florida and the Washington, D.C. area are familiar with you, but I would imagine for many of our listeners, they're saying, that's an interesting name. I don't know that I know anything about our radio program.
So the Reconnect is designed to help people get God back into every conversation. So much like what you're trying to do here on Point of View, we are really trying to remind people that there's nothing that God doesn't care about. And so we recognize the ambassadorial nature of every Christian, which means that if you are in a conversation and God's not being actively brought into that conversation, it's because you're actually failing in your ambassadorial role. So we're trying to equip people by taking the headlines of the day, walking around in those stories, bringing the Christian worldview to bear, to equip the individual Christian to then engage that subject matter in conversations that they might have in other environments.
Well, again, we give individuals an opportunity to find out a little bit more because we have a link to your website, and that is going to be, I think, helpful for them to find. They can just go to reconnectwithcarmen.com, or we have a link there. You also have your ebook, Do Not Despair. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And I've noticed in some of your blogs, the one I think I first heard about was after the first debate, you talked about the things that were not covered in that first debate. We did a little bit of that in our roundtable discussion as well. Well, now, Carmen, we've had 3 presidential debates and a vice presidential debate. I know this is sort of a wide open question, but what are your thoughts? Are there some issues that we as Christians wanted to hear about that we did not hear about? Were there some opportunities that were missed? What are your thoughts after now seeing and watching those 3 debates and then also the vice presidential debate?
I think that probably most disappointing to me is simply how negatively focused it has all been. I would much rather hear a person cast a positive vision, claim their own, not only their own dignity, which I think has been a missed opportunity for everyone involved in all of the debates, but to establish the dignity not only of the office of president, but of the dignity of faith in public life. I think that has been something missing from the debates. Not only religious liberty specifically, but even just the role of faith in the dynamic conversation of the culture. And so we might look at particular issues and say, I wish that there had been more conversation about the restoration of, let's say, marriage. We're probably not likely to hear that, and we all recognize that the time for that conversation and restoration has probably not yet come. But if I'm going to be honest, I sure do wish that had been a conversation that was surfaced. I don't think either candidate would have been particularly well equipped to answer that question. Certainly, Hillary Clinton is very pro same-sex marriage and LGBTQ rights and the advancement of those rights. And Donald Trump, being a person who's now been married multiple times, he is not in a particularly good position to argue for the sanctity of marriage or the role of and necessity of marriage in the culture. But I think that if we look at the issues that we face as a culture, many of them have at their root the basic destruction of the family unit and its role in the cultivation of healthy citizenry.
Well said. Let's, if we can, maybe give partial credit to Mike Pence, who, again, is the vice presidential
Kerby,
nominee.
did I lose you?
Yeah.
Did you lose me?
No, I'm still got you, but that's interesting. If she can't hear me, we will work our best to continue, because I was certainly going to give partial credit to Mike Pence, if for no other reason than here is an individual that obviously addresses many of those issues from a Christian point of view, oftentimes has referred to himself as number one, a Christian, number two, a conservative, number three, a Republican. I think, frankly, if we had had a little more cordial debate and Tim Kaine wasn't trying to interrupt him all the time, that would certainly have been an opportunity to get back into some of those issues, and certainly that is the case. The other one I'll raise as soon as we can get Carmen LaBerge back on the air is the fact that this weekend at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump issued his contract with the American voter. Now, you might remember, those of you that are a little bit older, that when Newt Gingrich came into office as the Speaker of the House, he had been a member of Congress for a number of years before that, but when he became Speaker of the House, he ran with many other members of Congress with a contract with America. And there have been all sorts of people that have been really recommending that indeed this would be an opportunity for Donald Trump to do something similar. So there again is this idea of a contract with the American voter, and he has a number of things that he has actually listed. First, to propose a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on all members, a hiring freeze on all federal employees to reduce the federal workforce, a requirement that every new federal regulation would be required to actually have two existing regulations eliminated, and a 5-year ban on White House and congressional officials becoming lobbyists after they leave government service. Something which, by the way, did exist during President Clinton's administration, but also was an issue, interestingly enough, that was ended at that particular time. So there are some attempts on the part of the Trump campaign to actually address this. And so I will, as we have some time, maybe even in the second hour, spend a little bit of time looking at this, because it's kind of like what I want to accomplish in the first 100 days. And then also has on the same day things that he would do to actually protect American workers. And then also a section on some of the broader legislative measures that he wanted to fight to begin to pass. So all of those are very important elements of a more positive campaign. Maybe we'll see more in the next couple of weeks. Probably not, but we'll see how that plays out. Let's take a break. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Carmen LaBerge. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the years, I've talked about how social media like Facebook and YouTube have sometimes censored conservative and Christian content. Facebook, for example, a few years ago pulled a page by former Governor Mike Huckabee that called for a Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day. Later, it was added back to Facebook. Lila Rose has had her investigative reports on Planned Parenthood pulled from YouTube. And I might mention that the Apple Store sometimes has pulled iPhone apps for groups like the Manhattan Declaration from their store. The latest example of censorship involves Dennis Prager and his YouTube videos on PragerU. According to his website, the videos present the most important ideas in free 5-minute videos. They usually feature a speaker with excellent video graphics in order to teach a point. They usually begin with a question like, is Islam a religion of peace, or were the founders religious? YouTube has created a list of 21 videos they have restricted. They include, are the police racist? And why don't feminists fight for Muslim women? And what ISIS wants. These are restricted, and this prevents children or anyone concerned about seeing videos that might have adult material. Videos on YouTube are restricted based upon vulgar language, violence and disturbing imagery, nudity, and sexually suggestive content. The people working at PragerU cannot find anything in their videos that violate YouTube's policies or user guidelines, so they filed a complaint with YouTube. Since the complaint seemed to go nowhere, they decided to put out a petition on their website asking YouTube to stop restricting these videos. It already has over 60,000 signatures. It would be tempting to brush this off since the videos are only restricted, but what is restricted today might be removed tomorrow. After all, we've seen this happen before. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us today Carmen LaBerge. And again, we talk about her radio program, The Reconnect with Carmen. Let's also, for just a minute, talk about your free ebook, which is Do Not Despair. Bringing God into the election conversation. That's a resource that people can find at reconnectwithcarmen.com, or just simply follow the links. And talk about that, because I guess you have concluded, and I think it's a reasonable conclusion, that a lot of people are discouraged and despair, and that is something that, as you've said in your blog, the word despair and evangelical shouldn't be in the same sentence.
Well, that's right. I think that we have heard folks describing evangelicals as despairing over this election cycle, and certainly we are challenged to make a faithful decision in terms of the choices that confront us at the top of the ticket. But the words evangelical and despair, in my view, should never appear in the same sentence. Jesus is the one who reminds us that in the world we're going to have tribulation. We're supposed to take heart because he has overcome the world. And the very word despair means to be a person, or it means a person who has no hope. And we are never without hope, regardless of the form of government under which we live, and regardless of the particular people who happen to be in power at a particular time. So those of us who are evangelical Christians, we need to actually be the people who are presenting a hope that is based in eternal reality, not simply in temporal things, even though we actively participate in and certainly pray for those who are in political leadership in our current day.
So again, one of the resources we make available on our website is the Pray, Organize, and Vote, a one-stop election resource, giving you all sorts of opportunities to think of prayer targets, and we certainly have been doing that with even our Pray for America material. The idea of organize, to really begin to encourage your friends, neighbors, coworkers, and others, as we said over a couple of weeks ago, to register to vote, because after all, in the last election, 13 million born-again Christians
were not even registered to vote. And then finally to vote, and that is to recognize in the last presidential election, 26 million born-again Christians did not vote. But another aspect of that is to actually encourage individuals. So this is why I wanted you to know about Carmen's free ebook. Carmen, it is free. You can just sign up and you'll receive it and download it and begin to read it, right?
That's exactly right. Yep, just go to reconnectwithcarmen.com, or you can text the word reconnect to 22828.
And so, again, we've got all sorts of opportunities for you to get some of the resources. And I thought I'd pick on another issue that you wrote about just recently, and that is Planned Parenthood celebrating its 100th anniversary. Even on our Friday weekend edition, we had Debbie Georgiadis, and we had a number of guests that have kind of been addressing some of these issues, Chelsea Yeoman and others. And we sort of spent a little bit of time talking about the issue of abortion and the stark difference between the two candidates. But you also have looked at this issue. When you think of Planned Parenthood today, you know, Cecile Richards is the face of it, but the original face and the founder is Margaret Sanger. And you've done enough research to help us understand some of the historical origins of Planned Parenthood and why we as Christians, as we engage in this conversation, need to understand a little bit more of its history.
Sure. Margaret Sanger is a eugenicist, and so she was definitely interested in cleaning up the culture. And from her view, that meant that there were a lot of folks who needed to be eliminated in order that the work of women would not be required. And so the disabled, anybody who wasn't an active contributor to society, certainly little children, women were the primary caregivers for all of those folks. We're talking again, 100 years ago. And so she wanted to make sure that women had the ability to, better control their time and better control their own destinies. And that meant she wanted to eliminate, frankly, these non-productive members of society. And so we don't get the pill until 50 years ago, but we get Margaret Sanger and what became Planned Parenthood 100 years ago. And so abortion it was illegal, but it became a part of the culture going that far back. And she was certainly interested in eliminating people of color from the population, and she was interested in eliminating anyone who might have any kind of disability. So Planned Parenthood has a really horrendous history, and that should be lifted up as well.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about with Dinesh D'Souza, he's been in studio with us, and a lot of people have seen Hillary's America, one of the more riveting scenes, and I've been with people that have watched it, and they go, is that true? Because you see Margaret Sanger, obviously in a reenactment, speaking in front of the Ku Klux Klan. And again, you also have many of her famous quotes about the fact that we really need to make sure that the black population doesn't realize that our goal is to eliminate them. Maybe we can even use the ministers as an attempt to do so. So you have everything from, of course, now we have birth control and we have abortion, but also you had back then involuntary sterilization, some which was not done necessarily with the Planned Parenthood clinics, but all of it was with the goal of let's getting rid of the weak, the frail, and the needy, so that women who were the primary caregivers of some of that would be freed up. And so you had this kind of eugenics idea that there were superior races and inferior races. There were superior people and inferior people. And I think this would still be going today if it weren't for all the horrific revelations of what happened at Nazi Germany.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think that there are several storylines there that folks from a Christian worldview could lift up. One of them is the conversation about race. And this is actually one of the places, Kerby, where I feel like evangelicals in the United States of America have a real opportunity to be leading the conversation about redemption and reconciliation. Those are words that we should reclaim. And in terms of the racial tension that's experienced in this country, if we're going to find a voice post this election, which neither one of these candidates is going to genuinely give voice, I don't believe, to evangelical Christianity. And so if we're going to find a voice, if we're going to establish a voice in the culture going forward, I think that areas like racial reconciliation and the redemption related to that and those relationships is one place that we could start. That's language that we know. It's biblical, and it would be a place that would be genuinely redemptive for the culture. So that's when I look back at the 100-year history of Planned Parenthood and what they have in view for the next 100 years. What I'm trying to do is get Christians in America to think forward 100 years and say, 100 years from now, what do we want to see be true in this country? And we got to start working on that now. I think the Cubs give us an example of this. They held on to a dream. I mean, right? They held on to a dream for 71 years. Are we that committed to something that we would really work for it and practice for it and play for it and invest in it and cheer it on for 70 years or 100 years to see it come true?
I've had some people say, the Chicago Cubs in the World Series, Donald Trump on the ballot. Are we in the end times or what? But anyway, that's another story. Let's also remind our listeners that when we talk about this issue of abortion, it is the leading cause of death, and your commentary reminds us of that. And even though many of us live in a kind of a sanctified, even somewhat sterilized environment where we hear about abortions, but we aren't in a situation where maybe we drive by an abortion clinic or something like that, you've run the numbers, and they're pretty significant, and it illustrates, again, what is happening right under our very noses.
Yeah, and it's not just happening under our noses. The people sitting on either side of you in the pew, one of those two families, is a family that's experienced abortion. And so this is something that is a part of what's going on in the hearts and in the homes of Christians, but it is not something that we are adequately addressing nor dealing with from the pulpit, or certainly in conversations in fellowship with one another. So this is a part of life for Roman Catholics. It's a part of life for evangelical Christians. And so when we look at this subject and we talk about 1 million babies a year their lives are going to be taken in this way, no small number of those are going to be Christians. And so when we have this conversation, we have to find ways to have the conversation that don't openly condemn the women, but help them understand that our preference at Christians would be that they would choose to have their baby, and then we as a family of faith have got to destigmatize single motherhood. I mean, if we're gonna say all of these women should be having all of these babies, then we as the church are going to have to become the church for single moms, and that is just really a really different. That would be a really different social ethic for the church to adopt.
Well, and also, of course, support pregnancy resource centers and all sorts of other things that relate to that as well. Let's take a break. Carmen LaBerge is with us. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back, take your phone calls, but let me again encourage you to reconnect with Carmen. It's on our website. We'll have more right after this.
From PureFlix comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
Based on her personal journals, I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13. Now playing. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are few things more important. Many ministries say 2016 has been tough, very tough. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not. But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net, click the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Carmen LaBerge with us. And again, we're talking about the campaign, but also encourage you to find out a little bit more about her daily radio program, the Reconnect with Carmen. We have information about that on our website. And Carmen, I thought maybe we'd go to one of our Florida callers first. Of course, Florida, very important, 29 electoral votes. And I think I noticed that you're going to have Senator Marco Rubio on your program soon. Is that true?
We just had him on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he was he was great.
Well, and again, we want to go to Florida, and we'll talk to Phil, WTJT. Phil, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a Southern Baptist minister about 50 years, and I call it Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party's death chamber, partial birth abortion. And I just wonder, as a nation, if we really have a conscience anymore. You know, we looked at ISIS when they beheaded those individuals over there and sent a video around the world, and there was a extreme outcry. And I haven't really heard any outcry over this from our fellow pastors and ministers and Christians. And maybe that's why the church is losing part of its credibility today when we don't stand up for especially an issue like this. I can just hear that baby crying.
Sure.
Please stand up for me. And only Donald Trump stood up, and for many that was political suicide. But I really think God is smiling on him, you know.
Sure. Well, let me give Carmen a chance to kind of join the conversation here a little bit, because we want to put God in the conversation. And certainly when you talk about and this is why a lot of that surfaced, that third debate that took place last week, you saw a very strong difference between Hillary Clinton essentially saying, no, you don't have any constitutional rights while you're still in the womb, none. And Donald Trump, of course, speaking out against this. Of course, Phil's talking about partial birth abortion, but whether you're talking about late-term abortion, partial birth abortion, all of these other issues, that's something that I am concerned about. We're even told by some of the major networks that, well, we can't really show what a partial birth and abortion would be like. This is the same network that shows all sorts of violence on television all the time. But we need to maybe encourage churches, pastors, and individual Christians to speak out against this issue of abortion, don't we?
Absolutely. I think that the caller raises such important words in this conversation. And the first one that you raised was the question of conscience. Have we really, as a culture, as a country, lost our conscience, certainly our Christ-informed conscience? And I would argue that we have. The prophet Jeremiah talks about getting to the place where the culture itself has lost the ability to blush. They have forgotten how to blush. They're so engaged in shameful activity all the time that they're not embarrassed by any of it. And I believe that's exactly what we heard and saw from Hillary Clinton in the third debate. She and others who agree with her have reached the point where there is no shame associated whatsoever, not only with abortion, but with abortion at any point in time for any reason or no reason at all. And to go further, I think that the place where we might still be able to influence our neighbors on this subject is on the question of taxpayer-funded abortion, because one of the things the Democrat Party wants to do with Hillary Clinton in the White House is to repeal the Hyde Amendment. And so not only do they want us to be, standing on the sidelines conscientiously objecting, that's okay with them as long as we keep that, private faith issue locked in the closet somewhere. But what they also want then is to make us participants and culpable in it. And so by using our tax dollars. And so I do think that the caller raises essential points. It's not only about unmasking the horror of abortion itself, particularly those late-term abortions. They are graphic. They are horrific. But unmasking the reality that we as a culture have absolutely forgotten how to blush about this. And yes, I suppose we certainly stand under God's righteous judgment in relationship to this issue.
When we get into some of this in the second hour, talk about some of the media bias, where, again, when you've had some of these videos that came out on Planned Parenthood, now some of these videos coming out by James O'Keefe's been on the program with us a number of times about the election being rigged and those kinds of things. Part of the problem is the American people don't know, but coming back to maybe what the churches can do, you quoted from Jeremiah. How about I quote from Isaiah for a minute, Isaiah 5, about living in a culture that calls evil good and good evil. If that applied to the southern kingdom, if you will, at that time, it applies to America as well. And it seems to me, Carmen, that sometimes when we are in a culture where the values are inverted and the heroes are the people that are pro-choice and the villains are those who are pro-life, the heroes are those who are LGBT and the villains are those individuals that believe in traditional marriage, it seems to me that at least the church and from the pulpits of America, we should be reminding people of what God's order is and what the real priorities in this life should be.
I couldn't agree with you more. One of my husband's favorite things to say frequently is, until the Word of God is restored to its rightful place in the life of the church is not going to be able to take her rightful stand in the life of the culture. And so the restoration of the Word, not only in the pulpit, but in the hands and hearts and operating systems of the people in the pews. Until that happens, we are not going to speak with one voice because we're not going to share one mind. I think that one of the things, Kerby, that probably disturbs me the most is the division or the divisiveness or the seemingly divided mind that the church has in the matters that are before us.
Right.
So you'll have Christians, people who are self-identified as Christians and even as Christian leaders, lining up on every side of every single one of these issues. And that's just adding confusion to an already confused culture. And so until we in the church recognize that God alone gets to define what is good, and we have evidence of it in the opening chapter of Genesis, and that's where we talk about the good old days, we've got to point that far back, and we cannot let people get nostalgic for something that's less than that. And so if we're going to talk about the good old days and the restoration of what is good, then we have got to be able to talk about what God really designed and how He designed it, and how we have fallen from that and how far we live now from that reality.
Let's go back to the phones and we'll talk to Gerald. Thank you for joining us today, calling in from the state of Texas.
Yes, sir. I'm actually a trucker. I'm passing through. But anyway, I want to mention something about the spiritual and the moral fiber of this country. With the introduction of dirty language in films and the kind of music we listen to these days, our society has become pretty much numb to the things that a long time ago would make us embarrassed. This gentleman before, the minister, was talking about the ISIS beheadings, the outrage just not being shouted out about that because we become numb to these things. We don't teach our kids anymore to respect each other, to respect values, to respect other people, to pray when they have their food, to give thanks to God. I was raised doing those things, but nowadays people don't teach those kids those things anymore. They hear the rap music, they hear the dirty language, they watch movies. Every other word is a dirty word. And our society's become spiritually and morally numb, and it's a shame. It really is.
Sure. Carmen, let me come to you, because what he's talking about is what I've talked about, and I'm sure you have as well, the coarsening of our culture. And as a result, the children aren't even allowed to be children anymore. They can be easily assaulted by all sorts of images, and sadly, because of the internet and because of computers and because of parents maybe not monitoring it, the age at which a young person sees a violent image or a sexual image is much younger than it ever was before. And it does seem to me that, once again, the church needs to not only line up on those issues, but the church needs to hold some standards of behavior, don't you think?
Absolutely. In my world, you're talking about the third mark of the church. You're talking about discipline and how we not only discipline our individual lives, but how we engage with one another in conversations about our behavior, not just about our thought and our speech, but actually our behavior. So when was the last time that you're aware of, I mean, this is a hypothetical question, but that you're aware of that a church and its leadership actually intervened in a failing marriage and actually said, you know what, we're going to come alongside you, we're going to stand with you, but you are, as members of the body of Christ, going to remain married. And we're going to help you do that. We're going to help you through this. We're just not engaged with one another at that level or at that depth in most of our churches in America. And so the whole concept of what the church is and what it's about and what it's for, I think that it has become so much a part of American culture that it has failed to be distinct from it in many, many, many ways. And so divorce is a part of that, certainly sexual, all kinds of sexual activity, and as you say, pornography.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Carmen LaBerge right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The students and faculty of the Margolin Hebrew Academy were staying overnight at the Doubletree Hotel in Jackson, Mississippi. While there, they used a meeting room at the hotel to conduct their Sabbath worship service. A Torah, religious books, and other musical instruments were left in the meeting room overnight with the intention of continuing with their worship the following morning. Justin Baker, a self-professed anti-Christian, anti-Semitic Satanist, was a security guard at the hotel that night, and he discovered the religious objects. He spat on the Torah, and he defaced the books with profanity and phrases including, "Hail Satan." Baker was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for his religious discrimination, and he was required to pay $9,999.99 in restitution damages. Baker may have been tempted to use religious liberty in a perverse attempt to justify his wicked actions, suggesting maybe that his adherence to the religion of Satanism motivated his actions. He would be wrong. Religious liberty is not a free pass to do what one likes. It is itself restrained for the good of religion as a whole and the dignity of the person. But the principles of religious liberty never sanction destroying the property of another. Rather, religious liberty demands that we respect the religions with which we may disagree. When we break that societal, social compact and deny others the freedom to exercise their religion, it is proper for the authorities to enforce the penalties of the law. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Carmen LaBerge with us for a little bit longer. Again, we encourage you to find out more about her radio program, The Reconnect with Carmen, and also this new e-book that is available, Do Not Despair, Bringing God into the Election Conversation. Just a great way to equip you to bring God into these conversations that we're having. And so, again, that is available at her website, reconnectwithcarmen.com. Let's take at least one more phone call before we run out of time in this segment, and that is in Kentucky this time. Charles, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. I'm in the ministry myself, And I feel like one of the problems is the fact that many pastors fail to tell the truth. I mean, when the Bible plainly says not to be a man pleaser, you're to please God. And when you're telling the truth, you're pleasing God. And the Bible plainly talks against many of the things in society today. And many pastors, I feel, are in fear of going to jail.
Okay, because I was going to ask you why you think that was. And first of all, I don't know of any pastor that's been jailed for what they preached from the pulpit in America. I do know of some in England and in Sweden and places like that, but that hasn't happened here. I don't think any of them are guilty of losing their tax-exempt status, although there was one church that lost it for a fairly short period of time and regained it. I think a lot of it might be just afraid of offending any of the donors in the church. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, part of that's part of it, but in the way our government is going, the prospect of being jailed is increasing, for telling the truth. And like you say, if you have many churches who have, let's say they have large, members who donate large sums of money, they may be afraid to offend them for fear of losing their church.
Sure. This Sunday I'm going to be speaking at Denton Bible Church, and we've had Tommy Nelson on here. And when I was with him a while back, there were some that were saying, well, maybe because of your stands on some of these issues, we'll revoke your tax-exempt status, which, again, I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But Tommy had a very good answer. He said, well, we'll just meet in home churches. I'm not going to let that bother me and keep me from telling the truth. And Carmen, maybe if nothing else, this is one of the values of some of these radio programs, to give people information and to talk about issues that frankly should be addressed from the pulpit. I know you're the president of the Presbyterian Lay Committee, and certainly you and your husband and others have had a chance to interact with various churches. But if nothing else, this is one of the reasons why I know you started your talk show. This is one of the reasons Marlon Maddox, more than 40 years ago, started this talk show, to provide news and information that you probably would not get from the mainstream media. Probably that was certain, and that you sometimes don't even hear in the pulpits and from the Sunday school classes of churches. So talk a little bit more about how we can educate ourselves.
Well, so I think the caller makes a very, very astute observation. I was in Frank Wolf's office before he retired from Congress, and one of the things that he said was, I think the time's coming that some of y'all are going to have to go to jail. And by that, he meant those of us who are sort of publicly verbal about telling the truth about what's happening in the culture and how it is contrary to the Christian worldview and to biblical principles. And so it shouldn't surprise us if that time comes. I think that folks who think that the United States of America is a Christian country probably aren't paying attention to what's happening in our schools, in our courthouses, in our universities, and in many of the films. And I mean, you could just march down the list, right? So are there Christians in America? Yes, absolutely. Do we need to be looking in the mirror and working on what's happening in our own hearts, in our own homes, in our own churches? Yeah, I think that's where the work begins. And I think that being sure we have the mind of Christ on the matters of the day, so that when we are giving people a piece of our mind, they're actually getting the piece of the mind of Christ. Not just, our thoughts on the matter, but really what is God's view, what is God's perspective. And it will be, on most days, in most cases, completely contrary to the view of the world.
Again, you've talked about in some of your commentary here that we need to look in the mirror and recognize that some of the circumstances we have are because of how we voted. So just before we let you go, talk about some of the resources that are available on your website. We've already mentioned the ebook, but there are all sorts of blogs and other resources that people can obtain. And again, the website is reconnectwithcarmen.com. So give us a little overview of some of the resources that you'd like to make available to our listeners.
Sure. Well, every week we provide sort of an aggregated list of things on Monday that we hope you would read and to stimulate your own thinking, and we try to engage in conversation about each of those subjects in the show. Right now we're doing a series on the concept of trumping the faith, how it is that Donald Trump in this election cycle really does challenge evangelical Christians in terms of our public witness and the divisions that it has illuminated among evangelicals. On Fridays, we always talk to a journalist. We go what we call behind the byline, and we try to get, and we've had folks from every news source that you can think of, and we're really trying to uncover the kind of bias that you're talking about. So we're trying to gain their perspective. What's it like for a secular or even humanist person to cover the God beat, to cover the religion beat in America? Recognizing that we have to know how people are thinking who are covering our issues if we want to influence that coverage. So those are some of the things that folks will find if they go to our website at reconnectwithcarmen.com.
Well, again, appreciate you being on the program. I know you need to get ready for your program as well, so thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thanks so much.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll open up the phones again and give you a chance to join our conversation. I want to get back into those polls because now we've learned a few things, interestingly enough. Some of this has come from WikiLeaks and also from James O'Keefe. And one of the pieces written by Robert Knight is what happens when the major media look the other way, because you have two Democratic Party campaign operatives who lost their jobs. But now that we look at what John Podesta has suggested, he's actually been encouraging those who are doing the polls to oversample, and even points out that if you could, for example, oversample the black vote by, say, 5%, that would swing the poll by 3 full points. Well, no, maybe that means that we shouldn't pay as much attention to some of these polls. Now, on the other hand, what's so intriguing is that some are paying attention to the polls and believing them. So another piece that we're going to talk about is how Hillary Clinton is now sort of looking past Donald Trump. She sort of thinks, I've already won, so now she's going to try to help other Democrats, in particular some of these Senate races. And you've even had some people writing in National Review about the fact that maybe she's headed to a landslide, but it will be one of the most negative of landslides. But in keeping with some of the comments we made about some of the positive ideas being presented, Donald Trump this weekend in Gettysburg spent some time setting forth his contract with the American voter. 6 things that he wants to do in the first 100 days, then 7 actions he wants to take, some of which he can do unilaterally to protect workers, then 5 actions to restore security and the constitutional rule of law, and then a list of at least 10 pieces of legislation that he wants to put forward in the first 100 days of his administration. So some of you say it's all negative. Well, yes, lots of times it is. So let's, if we can, look at some of the positive, but also look at whether or not we should pay so much attention to these polls. If you'd like to know a little bit more, some of these articles are already on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you can get our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. And let me mention again that in August, we're going to have this cruise to Alaska, and it will include not only me and my family, but also the families and individuals of Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. If you kind of enjoy the Friday weekend edition, you get to be on a boat with us for a week, and we're kind of excited about that as we get to see the frontier there in Alaska. All of it available at our website, pointofview.net. And when we come back, we'll open up the phones again to give you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening, one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Had Carmen LaBerge with us first hour. We're going to spend some time in this open line this hour to give you a chance to express your opinion on a number of different issues. And so we welcome your phone calls. Let's take one phone call before we get into some of the polls and some of the concerns about whether or not these polls oversample certain constituencies. We'll go to South Carolina on the Good News Network. Danny, thank you for calling today.
Well, thank you for taking my call, Kerby. I enjoy your program very much.
Thank you.
A little different subject to what you've been discussing, but I just wondered if anybody had thought about, since President Obama is leaving office, and he's always wanted to close Gitmo, if he would pardon all the people that are left there at the time he exited his office.
You know, that is one of those campaign pledges that he made that I know he would like to fulfill. He's tried to empty it out somewhat by allowing some of those individuals to go back, and they ended up on the battlefield. He has nothing to lose if he did that. I've not heard anybody else suggest it other than you, but I know that even as we've talked about this on previous occasions, I've used that as an illustration because a lot of people say, well, these party platforms, they don't mean a lot. Oh, yeah? Go back and look at the 2008 party platform for the Democratic Party. Ask me how many of those things that President Obama said he was going to do, he did. And with the exception maybe of closing Guantanamo Bay, most of the others, in one way or another, he's attempted to do. He wasn't able to pass comprehensive immigration reform, but certainly attempted to do so. He certainly gave us Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. And I mean, you go down this list and say he's wanted to achieve a number of things during his administration, and it's possible. So you're the first person to bring it up, so we'll kind of pay attention to that.
I've mentioned it to my congressman and so forth, but can't get any response from them. I don't know if they're afraid to mention it, afraid to give him an idea or what.
I would think it would still be doubtful, but who knows? I've given up trying to predict anything in this campaign or even what this president would do over the last 8 years, so we'll leave it at that. I did want to get into these polls for just a little bit, and then we'll take some more phone calls. And the reason is it shows you, first of all, they're all over the map. But more importantly, there may be some problems with the sampling. So let me start with the one that shows that Donald Trump is ahead. That's the Rasmussen report, which, by the way, is one that has been generally pretty accurate. And it shows in their latest telephone and online survey that of likely voters, and there's the key, because it's always hard to figure out who are likely voters, 43% go to Donald Trump, 41% go to Hillary Clinton. So he would have a 2% lead. We'll get back into the fact that you're elected by the Electoral College, not by the popular vote, but let's leave that for the moment. But I want to call your attention to a couple of things in addition to the fact that he's leading by 2 points on the Rasmussen poll, and that is the Libertarian candidate in this poll, Gary Johnson, has 5%. The Green Party nominee, Jill Stein, has 3%. And then you have another 3% that likes some other candidate, which I think might be Darrell Castle, the Constitution Party candidate, or Evan McMillan, who is kind of an independent candidate. Now, it's interesting, if you look at a few of those individuals, you always assume that no third-party candidate would win a state. There are two possibilities in those names I just mentioned. One is that Evan McMillan has run relatively well, it's kind of a tongue twister there, in Utah, And so that is something kind of interesting because there are 6 electoral votes. And if indeed this election becomes very close and neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump get 270 electoral votes, the fact that Evan McMillan has 6 electoral votes out of Utah would throw it to the House of Representatives. And so that's kind of intriguing. The other one, which is a little less likely, but at least still theoretically possible, is that the former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson, could win New Mexico and get those 5 electoral votes. Again, I don't think that's as likely. But the impact that Evan McMillan, Darrell Castle, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson are having is that they, first of all, are preventing any candidate from getting 50%. And second of all, some of that might be taken away from one or the other. And so that's kind of an intriguing set of circumstances as well. If you accept the Rasmussen poll, interestingly enough, they estimate that 88% of voters say they are now certain how they would vote. Now, it's not only that they're certain, many of them have. Early voting has been going on. Either early voting or in-person absentee voting has gone on in more than a dozen states. Today, Monday, it's opened up in a number of other states, including where I'm broadcasting from in the state of Texas. So you already have some people already casting their vote before any other, say, October surprise comes down the line. And, of course, if 88% think they've pretty much made up their mind, then it means that all of this running around the country in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Florida and North Carolina and Arizona and Nevada and Colorado, wherever they might be going, is to find those 12% that are still a little bit doubtful in the midst of this. So that's something to put on the table. 2 more to mention. I did mention this at the first hour, but again, people tune in and tune out. The Investors Business Daily poll basically says that they are tied at 41%, and then assume that Gary Johnson in this poll has 8% rather than the 7% we heard over there, and that Jill Stein has 3.7% or something of that nature. And again, some of the others are smaller percentages. And so you can see that we see a difference between ahead by 2 even, or then behind by almost 2, and that would be the Los Angeles Times poll that today says that Hillary Clinton has 45%, or some would say maybe there have been a few, if you look at the most recent, I guess you use this one, 44% to 43%, but in both cases, Donald Trump behind by 1, Hillary Clinton up by 1. Or to look at the fact that the tracking poll just last week for the Los Angeles Times had Donald Trump up 45% to 44%. Part of this problem comes down to something we'll talk about a little bit more after the break, but let me just at least introduce it, and that is the difficulty that even reputable pollsters have in trying to estimate how many people are actually going to vote. The problem, I think, with many of these polls is that they're using as their model how many people voted in 2012. I think it's unreasonable. I could be wrong, but I think it's unreasonable to assume that as high a percentage of people are going to vote for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side as voted for Barack Obama. Yes, first woman, Barack Obama, first African American, but still, bottom line is there is a definite lack of enthusiasm for her campaign. That's not controversial. Just look at some of the rallies. Matter of fact, some that have been canceled because just of lack of enthusiasm. A lot more enthusiasm for Donald Trump. So maybe those percentages of sampling are off. But then when we come back from the break, we've learned a little bit more about some of the ways in which there are memos that have been sent to these polling outfits about, if you could do a little more oversampling of this group. And the idea is that maybe you've undersampled Hispanic Americans, maybe you've undersampled African Americans, or in one case, Native Americans, and that is why you have these polls that are very different. And so we'll talk about that and what looks like another attempt to try to influence the election by even beginning to rig the polls. We'll talk about this right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Over the years, I've talked about how social media like Facebook and YouTube have sometimes censored conservative and Christian content. Facebook, for example, a few years ago pulled a page by former Governor Mike Huckabee that called for a Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day. Later, it was added back to Facebook. Lila Rose has had her investigative reports on Planned Parenthood pulled from YouTube. And I might mention that the Apple Store sometimes has pulled iPhone apps for groups like the Manhattan Declaration from their store. The latest example of censorship involves Dennis Prager and his YouTube videos on PragerU. According to his website, the videos present the most important ideas in free 5-minute videos. They usually feature a speaker with excellent video graphics in order to teach a point. They usually begin with a question like, is Islam a religion of peace, or were the founders religious? YouTube has created a list of 21 videos they have restricted. They include, are the police racist? And why don't feminists fight for Muslim women? And what ISIS wants. These are restricted, and this prevents children or anyone concerned about seeing videos that might have adult material. Videos on YouTube are restricted based upon vulgar language, violence and disturbing imagery, nudity, and sexually suggestive content. The people working at PragerU cannot find anything in their videos that violate YouTube's policies or user guidelines, so they filed a complaint with YouTube. Since the complaint seemed to go nowhere, they decided to put out a petition on their website asking YouTube to stop restricting these videos. It already has over 60,000 signatures. It would be tempting to brush this off since the videos are only restricted, but what is restricted today might be removed tomorrow. After all, we've seen this happen before. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Got a number of calls coming in, so I'll get to those real quickly, but I did want to at least finish my point, and that is Tyler Durden in Zero Hedge has been writing about some of this and pointing out that in some of these polls, and he looks at one of these, the Reuters, ABC, and Washington Post poll, includes a 9-point sampling bias towards registered Democrats. Well, again, if you assume that indeed we have 36% of the electorate who are going to vote Democrat and only 27% of Republicans and then 31% independents, well, it doesn't take any time at all to figure out how that poll really looks very good for Hillary Clinton and says that she's going to win by 12 points. She's not. But it's just, I think, an illustration of how the sampling of the various constituencies, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, can oftentimes determine the poll. And so here, I think it's really interesting that when you look at some of this, even a small oversample of black voters of like 5% could swing the poll by 3 full percentage points. And so again, in some of these emails by John Podesta, you have those being linked now, and it talks about maybe even a request and giving recommendations for oversampling of various people that you're polling. And the examples that they used were maybe to oversample Hispanics, Hispanic Americans, to oversample the Native American population. And in every case, we're talking about oversampling something that would help Democrats, never would help Republicans. So this is why I've always said you should take all of these polls with a grain of salt.
maybe a bag of salt in a few cases, because they are based upon certain assumptions. And if those assumptions are incorrect, it is the classic garbage in, garbage out. If you give me bad data, even for some of the computer simulations I developed when I was in graduate school, but you give me bad data, I'm going to give you bad results. And that's exactly what we have here with some of the polls. I might just mention that in addition to all the WikiLeaks, we've had now the third set of videos that have dropped from Project Veritas. And the third set now are even more, if you will, scandalous for the Clinton campaign, because we have the information that comes from one of the operatives there by the name of Creamer. And in this, he talks a little bit about some of the connections that actually are made to Hillary Clinton, and so illustrates again a very important connection between what's called Democracy Partners and the Hillary Rodham Clinton campaign. So this is surfaced. By the way, I also know that James O'Keefe, who has done these videos and put these together, has said that he feels like his life is in danger. So there you have another concern that has surfaced out of this divisive campaign. And then we'll get to the calls, but let me just mention that Robert Knight's piece today, which you can find in the Washington Times, When Major Media Look the Other Way. He says 2 Democratic Party campaign operatives lost their jobs last Tuesday after being caught red-handed on video describing how to incite violence at Donald Trump rallies and how to commit massive voter fraud. One of those, the first one, had to do with what's called bird dogging and trying to create violence. The second one had to do with voter violence, and then the third one here, rigging the election. Then these were captured, of course, by James O'Keefe of Project Veritas. And he says that the media ignored all of this. These stories, these comments were being ignored by the major media. And he says the media also ignored ongoing bombshells from WikiLeaks, such as Hillary Clinton's campaign chief, John Podesta, suggesting in an email that illegal aliens can vote if they have driver's license. Is there any wonder why, he says, millions of Americans feel that this election is being rigged by a hyper-partisan media, aided by Obama administration officials that are using the Justice Department to attack safeguards such as voter photo ID? And he quotes from the Media Research Center. We had Tim Graham on the program just last week, but I'll give you the quote from the Media Research Center, then we'll take some phone calls. But the Media Research Center said not only have the videos been ignored by ABC, CBS, and NBC, most of the nation's most prestigious newspapers haven't touched it, according to a Nexus search for Project Veritas. He said the following news operations and outlets can be added to the zero coverage list so far: the New York Times, USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, and the Chicago Tribune. The PBS NewsHour and NPR transcripts also came up with 0, and Associated Press was also 0. So this is one reason why you need to get more sources of news than from the mainstream media. And if I could slightly pat myself on the back, one of the reasons why I think you just need to listen to Point of View, because you would even maybe not know about some of this if you hadn't been listening to this program. Let's go and take some phone calls. Lots of calls here, and I'll give you the chance to express your opinion, because tomorrow we're going to really focus a lot on foreign policy. We have Jay Sekulow with us. We'll be talking about his book, Unholy Alliance, What's Happening in the Middle East and Iran. Then we'll spend an entire hour with Avi Lipkin talking about Israel, the Middle East, and what people in Israel are thinking about the campaign. What are their thoughts about the way in which these candidates would address the issue of Israel? So we're going to give you an opportunity to hear from them. But right now I want to hear from you. So we'll go to South Carolina on the Good News Network. And Franklin, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, thank you very much for taking my call. I just had an interesting little poll that I took on my own, and as Christ is my witness, I'm not making this up. We recently took a trip up to New York to go salmon fishing in the Salmon River. We drove from Florence, South Carolina to Pulaski, New York. And all of that 800 miles or more, I didn't see one Hillary yard sign or a roadside post. And I promise you, I've seen lots and lots of Trump signs. Okay, now, I expected when I got up in that part of the country I tried to listen closely to the talk that was going on. I heard no talk with anybody supporting Hillary. I heard lots of talk with everybody supporting Trump. And then I listened to this one lady that was asked a question. She said, and somebody asked her, said, why do you like Trump? And her answer was, because he's running against Hillary. And, I think that's my answer. Why do I like Trump? Maybe he's not the shining star, but he's running against Hillary. And my final comment is, listen to the Good News Radio, folks, and for the truth, and watch when you see her on TV. This woman is morally sick. And if you watch the way she walks and goes on and off the plane and stays, she has to hold on and just about do certain things to keep herself upright. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you for taking my call.
Oh, I'd love to go salmon fishing with you sometime, but I'm glad you had an opportunity to do that, and thank you for your on-the-spot look at what you found up and down the eastern seaboard. So thank you, Franklin.
Yes, sir.
Call again. Let's see if we can let's go to North Carolina for just a minute. WGNN and William. We went from South Carolina to North Carolina. What would you like to say to our listeners today?
Hey, Kerby. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, first, it's pretty clear that the left they're going to do any and everything possibly that they can do to influence anything. The polls, the election, it's, as one fellow once said, by any means necessary. To them, the end justifies the means. They don't care if it's honest or dishonest. They're going to do anything they can do.
Well, one of the reasons I brought this up is, I tend to, I'm an honest person. I tend to assume that people are going to be honest, and especially pollsters. I mean, after all, their credibility goes down the drain if they are way off. But if you think that this is a transformative election, I can see how your bias would say, well, okay, it's maybe better to actually sample 36% of Democrats and only 27% of Republicans. Because after all, maybe there'll be the same kind of enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton that there was for Barack Obama in 2008. And boy, that's a mistake, because there was even a little less enthusiasm for Barack Obama after 4 years. But there, again, if you just have your bias, but then some people might even be deliberately trying to adjust these polls, then that's why I just want to have people say, look, just because you see a poll that says Hillary Clinton's going to win by 11 points, and now she's saying she's going to work, as we posted one of our articles, to help the Democrats, she may be believing those polls more than she should, but the only poll that counts happens 2 weeks from tomorrow, right?
That's exactly right. And I got one last thing, really. I wasn't for Trump at all until he got the nomination. I really thought that we had, there were quite a few potential nominees out there that were better than Trump. But that being said, Trump is the nominee. So all Christians have to get behind Trump. I know there's so many of them out there that say they can't, their conscience won't let them do it. Well, I was one of those people initially, but I have to do what's right. I have to cast my vote against Hillary. I have to.
I would think so. Let's take a break, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about this contract with the American voter that Donald Trump has put forward. I think you'll be pleased with some of the items on it. We'll be back right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Take some more phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. One of the things that voters have been clamoring for, and even Carmen LaBerge talked about in the first hour, is a positive agenda. Why it took Donald Trump so long to come up with this, I do not know, and certainly Hillary Clinton understands this, but he's put together what is called a contract with the American voter. Now, if you have something to write with, let me encourage you to grab it, because you might want to take some notes, or, of course, we have it posted on our website, pointofview.net. it uses the same kind of model that was used by Newt Gingrich back in 1994. You remember the election of Bill Clinton in 1992, and then you had the remarkable election of all sorts of members of Congress, and it turned from Democrat to Republican. So in 1994, they did what was known as the contract with America. Well, Donald Trump has his contract with the American voter. Now, if you have something to write with, you might put down just a couple of numbers in vertical. 6, 7, 5, and then 10. 6, 7, 5, and 10. The 6 stands for the 6 measures that are in his contract with the American voter to clean up the corruption and special interest collusion in Washington. And these are things like a constitutional amendment to impose term limits, a hiring freeze on all federal employees, and allowing attrition to reduce the size and hopefully scope of the government, which is the third one. That is, for every new federal regulation, 2 existing regulations need to be eliminated. A lifetime ban on White House officials lobbying on behalf of a foreign government, a 5-year ban on White House and congressional officials becoming lobbyists, and on and on and on. So that's part of the 6, which deal with this corruption and the kind of the establishment. Boy, once this comes out, a lot of establishment Republicans might have a problem because he wants to really clean up Washington. So he says, and I have every reason to believe it, since a lot of that's written down, and a lot of it, I think, comes out of the hearts and minds of people like Mike Pence and other people on his campaign. So that's the 6. The 7 have to do with 7 actions to protect American workers. He, number 1, would announce his intention to renegotiate NAFTA or else withdraw from it, according to Article 2205, to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to direct the Secretary of Treasury to label China as a currency manipulator, to direct the Secretary of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Representative to identify all foreign trading abuses that unfairly impact American workers. And he goes on and talks about the Keystone Pipeline, all sorts of other issues. And so that's part of the 7. So you have 6, 7, then 5 actions to restore security and the constitutional rule of law. Number 1, on the first day, he says, I'll cancel every unconstitutional executive action, memorandum, or order issued by President Obama. Number 2, begin the process of selecting a replacement for Justice Scalia and from one of the 20 on his list. I've seen a list of 11. I'll have to look at that 20. Cancel all federal funding to sanctuary cities. Whew. 4th, begin removing more than 2 million criminal illegal immigrants from the country and cancel visas to foreign countries that won't take them back, and on in that regard. And then the final 10 are the key pieces of legislation. Middle-class tax relief and Simplification Act, end of the Offshoring Act, School Choice and Education Opportunity Act, repeal and replace Obamacare Act, the Affordable Child Care and Elderly Care Act, and a variety of others, and even a Clean Up Corruption in Washington Act. So that's where you go, and it takes you 3 pages to print them out, but we have it on our website. Again, 6 measures to clean up corruption, 7 actions to protect American workers, and then, as I mentioned, 5 actions he would take on the first day to restore security and the constitutional rule of law, and 10 pieces of legislation that would be put forward in the first 100 days of a Trump administration. So, love to get your thoughts on all of this. Let's go back to the phones and give you a chance to join the conversation. We'll head to Missouri, KNEO. Kate, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I was listening to you when you said you were talking that Hillary is gone now and helping other people on their races. Now that worries me because she's not the type that's just going to walk away unless she thinks she's already got this thing hooked.
She somehow does, and I posted this article too. You can find it on our website. It is the 4th article there in which she said, and I'm just to give you, Hillary Clinton said, quote, she didn't even think about responding to, unquote, Donald Trump anymore, and so said she was going to spend her final weeks on the road, quote, emphasizing the importance of electing Democrats down the ballot. So she thinks that she's already got it won, so she's going to now spend her time and energy, in part, helping senators. And so there's some that say, well, maybe the Democrats will indeed capture the Senate and conceivably even the House of Representatives. So either she knows a lot more about the polls than any of us do, or she's believing these polls a little bit more than she should. But again, I think anybody looking at this has to say that given the electoral map, the Democrat starts out with a tremendous advantage, 217 electoral votes. If you look at those states which in the past have voted Democrat, you can assume they may be again voting for that. And then when you have some of these states which you never would have thought would have been in play, some of these toss-up states like Arizona and Georgia and Florida, well, Florida we would assume so, Ohio, some of those, that's why I think she thinks she's got it won. And so that's what we know at this particular hour. But, you know, as I said before, polls are one thing, but the only poll that matters is what happens on November 8th, right?
Well, yeah. I worry, though, about whether or not there is something else. I don't trust her. I mean, have they got something else in play? Because I heard you say that they took people on buses from place to place. It would be a good civics class for the students to go in and check did you really go to the poll and vote and call them. It would be a good civics class for teachers, I think.
Well, again, I've said that, and Donald Trump's even called for people to be sort of unofficial poll watchers. It's possible that you could still actually sign up to be a poll watcher. So contact your local political party in your county. I think the deadlines for some of those have passed, but there's nothing to keep you from just kind of watching what happens that day. Pick up a seat, sit there, watch how it goes, and see if there's any hanky-panky taking place. But we'll see. But this is part of the process, and that's why I wanted you to know a little bit more about it. Let's go to the phones in Texas, KYCC. Nancy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, hi. I called in reference to the whole idea of the abortion issue.
Sure.
So many times when I hear everybody mention pro-life, I do not hear anybody talking about natural family planning. And years ago, I was coming back from Germany, from Mannheim, and I had my daughter at Fort Knox. But when I was pregnant, the chapel program had a seminar, and I didn't really pay too much attention at that point. God grabbed me, said, come on. So I brought my then husband with me, and we found out about it. And I went, wow, that makes sense. And at that point, I couldn't be on the pill because I would get that same thing that Nixon had in his legs, phlebitis. And so I found out more when I went down to Fort Hood with my little daughter, and I was trained down there, and I taught at Fort Hood through the chapel program and got my training down in Corpus Christi, and then I took it with me back to Germany as another lady came over. And what's so great about it is that I'm political science major, and I learned about my own biology, and I taught other women, whether they were married or whether they were single, to know their own fertility. And it's like, that's not okay, Nancy. And I've had people that are male in the Catholic Church here. Oh, no, we only teach this for married couples. And I'm going, wait a minute, no. I said, I taught this at Fort Bliss with a program here for the youth called Teen Star, Sexuality Training and Adult Responsibility. And it shows the kids what their cycle is and that they have a right to know biologically how did God put them together, and yet to be careful with it.
Sure. And again, the problem with it is the idea of family. Well, the idea of family planning now is all been co-opted, as you well know, by, as we mentioned a minute ago, Planned Parenthood. And instead of teaching young girls about fertility and about their bodies, and even really, in some respects, having an understanding of how God made them, instead we want to teach the kids how to put condoms on bananas and how to get a hold of various kinds of devices and all that kind of thing. And that's the problem. And again, one of the other questions I know you're going to ask is about why we don't fund it. Well, that's again because of this anti-religious, kind of abstinence, anti-family planning bias in Congress. They're more and more defunding all the programs that teach abstinence and teach the various kinds of values. And that's the sad reality of what's happened both in our Congress and in our public schools. So, Nancy, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll see if we can get in as many phone calls as possible. You'll have the opportunity to express your opinion, and we'll give you that opportunity right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The students and faculty of the Margolin Hebrew Academy were staying overnight at the Doubletree Hotel in Jackson, Mississippi. While there, they used a meeting room at the hotel to conduct their Sabbath worship service. A Torah, religious books, and other musical instruments were left in the meeting room overnight with the intention of continuing with their worship the following morning. Justin Baker, a self-professed anti-Christian, anti-Semitic Satanist, was a security guard at the hotel that night, and he discovered the religious objects. He spat on the Torah, and he defaced the books with profanity and phrases including, "Hail Satan." Baker was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for his religious discrimination, and he was required to pay $9,999.99 in restitution damages. Baker may have been tempted to use religious liberty in a perverse attempt to justify his wicked actions, suggesting maybe that his adherence to the religion of Satanism motivated his actions. He would be wrong. Religious liberty is not a free pass to do what one likes. It is itself restrained for the good of religion as a whole and the dignity of the person. But the principles of religious liberty never sanction destroying the property of another. Rather, religious liberty demands that we respect the religions with which we may disagree. When we break that social compact and deny others the freedom to exercise their religion, it is proper for the authorities to enforce the penalties of the law. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to the state of Georgia, 16 electoral votes, and what all of a sudden has become a toss-up state. Who would have predicted that? Ben, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. I appreciate you, your show, and all that you all are doing.
What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, to be honestly to say, it's very difficult. I know America, all you hear everywhere you go, in churches, in conversation, and just talking to someone at Walmart, we have a rough election this time. People like neither one of the candidates. Myself, I am possibly going to vote for Trump, but I'm still undecided with the other independent candidates. But the platform that he stands on, not necessarily him, is what I'm voting for. Yes. I feel that he missed the chance back in the 3 debates with his babbling and
I agree.
Talking about himself.
This contract with the American voter, I think, could be a turning point. And Ben, 4 million people have already voted. 4 million people have already cast ballots. And so he's missed that opportunity with those people because they've already voted, and now he makes that announcement this weekend in Gettysburg. So I agree with you. But again, you think you'll vote for the platform. I would also add vote for the policies that come from that platform, which we see now in the contract, and also vote for the personnel. Do you like people like Rudy Giuliani and Ben Carson and Mike Huckabee and Mike Pence? Because those are some people that are probably going to be in his cabinet. As a matter of fact, one is the vice president, so definitely would be there. So does that help at all?
Yes, it does. And I'm definitely looking at the Supreme Court. I think that's the major thing because these people are in there not for a term, but for life.
That's right.
And therefore, I think that it touches a big component of where I'm going to cast my vote.
Well, Ben, I appreciate you calling in. Don't be a stranger. I'd love to hear from you again. I'm going to give as many people as a chance to express their opinion. So let's move up to Missouri this time, KTTK. And James, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
My point of view is that the people who want to vote Democrats on the president election, they want to spend the world's money, the country's money, on preservation of capital criminals at the cost of little babies. And it seems like that they are putting out everything they can toward perversion. And like the book of Isaiah said, they're taking right and called it wrong and took wrong and call it right. And I think a person who votes for Hillary is voting for the wrong side, not wrong side morally.
Sure.
They're looking at their pocketbook and they think, well, I'm going to get a raise from minimum wage is going to go up if she wins. Well, if she wins and minimum wage go up, they still lose because everything we buy will go up also.
And I'm not sure that all of them would keep their job, too. If you raise minimum wage, sometimes the first action from an employer, because he or she as a manager has to keep the bottom line secure, would be to let some people go. So, I don't know. I mean, raising the minimum wage is not a job creator. We pretty much have proven that over time. And but again, I appreciate your comments. So whether we look at Isaiah 5:20, call good evil and evil good, or whether we look at what's at stake, I think there are some really important issues here. Let's see if we can get to Tammy in Illinois, WPEO. Tammy, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I always listen to you on my way to pick up my kids from school every day. It's my political fix for the day. But I just wanted to say that I don't understand Christians that won't vote. I mean, do they think about the fact that would they let someone choose what clothes they want to wear in the morning? Would they let someone else choose what cereal they want to buy at the grocery store? No, they wouldn't. And those are so inconsequential. But yet they'll let someone else choose their president? I just don't understand it.
I don't understand it either. Again, for those of you that did not go to the very significant Revive Us event that was at your local theaters, Kirk Cameron is going to do it again tonight. And whether you went last week or whether you go tonight, let me just share one of the most arresting statistics that came from that. And that is that in the last three elections, basically the various candidates have won by about 5 million votes. And when you, as you have heard me say more than once, 26 million born-again Christians did not vote in the last election. In addition, through 13 million were not registered to vote. That means 39 million didn't participate in the process. And if even some of them did, don't you think that might have changed the election, not just at the presidential level, where, again, 5 million votes is very significant, but in these senatorial races, in these House races, or even in your state legislative races? Those are all very important issues. So, Tammy, it's hard to believe that people would let someone else pick their pet, their toothpaste, their clothes, whatever, but they're going to let somebody else pick their president? Oh, you got a great line.
I just wish they would think about that. Maybe that would change some of their minds.
I think so. Great line. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Let me go on real quickly. Let's see if I can get out to Nevada real quickly. KNLB. Bonnie, we only have a little bit of time, but I'd love to hear your comments.
Okay, real quickly. 3 separate polls, 3 separate totally economic and lifestyle groups. One, the fabulous, and these girls live nicely. They live very well off, and they did a middle thing after the debate, and everyone except for one was for Trump, and it was all positive, and they're all Trump all the way. And then totally different economic mother with children with disabilities, like mine. She put out a simple poll, Trump or Clinton, very simple. Don't give me your drama, and there wasn't one Hillary on there. And then this morning there was another one on Facebook. It was probably NPR or something. It was talking about, who does people want to vote for? And overwhelmingly, state after state, people said the same thing. A, there's no Hillary Clinton signs. B, she can't fill a high school gymnasium, and yet Trump fills tens of thousands of people. And that everybody they talk to, I know 85 people, I know 65 people, and they're all for Trump. And so we don't believe the polls.
Well, and again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to give you some of that information. You're in the state of Nevada, and we know only so well those 6 electoral votes are going to be important as well. Another one of those toss-up states. And I wish we had more time, but we will cover a little bit this tomorrow. I'll open the program with some open lines so that if you would like to express your opinion that you did not have a chance to do today, call in early tomorrow. Then we're going to go to Jay Sekulow. And then I see some of you want to talk about Israel, and that's what we're going to talk about in the second hour. Avi Lipcomb. What about this? How does the Republican Party view Israel? How does the Democratic Party view Israel? How does Hillary Clinton view Israel? How does Donald Trump view Israel? What kind of policies? What's going to happen in the Middle East? What about Iran? We've got all sorts of issues we will cover tomorrow. So a lot of it will be more foreign policy, simply because those are the 2 guests that we have lined up. But we'll also leave a little bit of time for you to make some comments as well. Spend some time talking about those polls so you can get some of that. The address by Donald Trump is on our website. His contract with the American voter is on there. It's only 3 pages, so I would encourage you to go and print it out. Then we have the material from Carmen LaBerge about Planned Parenthood. And then the one where Hillary Clinton is now so confident she's going to win, she's actually decided that she's going to emphasize the importance of electing Democrats down the ballot. Well, either she's right or she's going to be in for a big surprise. We won't know, but 2 weeks from now we will. If you would like more information, it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Don't forget to go to our Pray, Organize, and Vote. Check out joining us for an Alaska cruise. There's just a lot of material there. And most importantly, I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. They've made this program happen, and we appreciate their work behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.